Welcome to Higher Ed Athletics. Today I'm joined by the athletic director at Boise State University, Jeramiah Dickey. Jeremiah, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Travis. I appreciate it.
Well, let's get right into the questions. Just thank you so much for joining me. Obviously, a lot of exciting things going on at Boise State. And, this is the Higher Ed Athletics podcast, Higher Ed First. And, I just recently ended a year working for a Big Ten president, and I'm even more interested now in that communication kind of style and protocol between college presidents and their athletic directors at really every level. And with President Trump being on the D1 board of directors, which I didn't know until I did this research, during such an uncertain time in college athletics right now, you're both relatively new to the university. So how would you describe that relationship you two have formed, and how does her being on that board kind of change that, you think?
It's a great question because, you're only as good as those you surround yourself with, and relationships are important, and especially for her and I, her as a new president, me as a new athletic director, we very much feed off that and try to be supportive of each other, and with her role, on the board, and my role within our conference and representing this brand. Obviously a lot of things are coming up on a daily basis. And my job as an athletic director is to report up and to be as transparent and as much as I possibly can, and to communicate as much as I possibly can. And we've developed a good rhythm, of what that looks like, because things are happening daily and they're changing daily. And we have to have the ability to pivot. And a lot of times I need the support of the institution, or there are things that come up on a national level that she's going to need background and understanding of how it's going to be impactful for our department and as as an athletic director, and so that relationship is key, and it requires a lot of vulnerability and just transparency, and that means her and I are talking sometimes really late at night or early in the morning. We obviously have a regular meeting schedule, but I try to lead up into her as much as I possibly can, and not just with what's going on nationally, with conference realignment and transfer portal and name, image, and likeness, you name it. Our industry is there's a lot of change right now, but also as a new AD, I'm coming in and I'm changing a lot in terms of our department, our culture, our expectations. And, I want her to always be in the loop and prepared for what's coming. Everyone wants change until you require them to change. Right. And so having the experiences that I have over the course of I guess over 20 years now, there were certain things that I came in and I knew we needed to do right away that was very different from maybe they had operated over the course of time. And, and so I was able to get out in front of her, and to at minimum, give her a heads up that, look, we're going to make some of these changes and we are going to get some feedback that maybe isn't overly positive, but we have to trust the process because I know this will pay dividends down the road. And I've tried to do that at every turn. I don't like secrets, and I don't like her ever being caught off guard. And so that's something I hold myself to a very high standard for.
Yeah, you mentioned that you have a regular standing meeting, so I was able to kind of see behind the curtain of how a cabinet works with the president, and that was really eye-opening to me. So just for other people, how important has that been to basically be on the cabinet? It's becoming more standard, but there's still several schools where I don't think the athletic director is necessarily on the cabinet. But how's that? How often do you meet one-on-one, and then as a cabinet? And then how has being on the cabinet also helped you communicate with the rest of the university? Because you're both doing, the university and the athletic department, which we'll talk about, very ambitious changes to the university. So kind of just that cabinet role and that one-on-one, what's that frequency?
Yeah. I think there's and you're always adapting, because during COVID, when I got here, that was very different and everything was Zoom. And, but in general, we usually meet once a month in person. And that could be, for an hour and a half, depending on what we have on our agenda. And then as her leadership team or executive team, that's traditionally once a month. And then we also have the vice presidents that meet, once a month. And so we're constantly changing that rotation. And I actually apologize. We also meet as an admin council. Admin council are all the VPs, direct reports to the president, and also the deans. And for me, especially as a new AD, those are experiences that, I didn't necessarily get as a deputy AD. And that was new to me. And so you go into these meetings, and it's been really beneficial for me because we are the front porch. The athletic department is the front porch of this institution. And in this state, we are the front porch of this state. We are the biggest brand, and we represent so much more than ourselves. And so me being connected and looking for those opportunities to collaborate, whether it's with a specific college or dean or area of campus, because it truly takes a team. What we're being asked to do in this day and age, and with how much the industry is changing, if the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing, you will set yourself up for failure. On top of, there are a lot of opportunities because we live out in action what innovation means, and that's important to us. And so being able to partner with Kobe, our College of Business, or Advancement on a launching of a capital campaign, or the foundation on certain things, and we're always looking for those opportunities. For example, our MAL program, our Master of Athletic Leadership, that is a program that's very important to us as we're navigating, what I consider a crisis in our industry, that a lot of individuals are getting out of our industry for whatever the reasons are. We have to backfill these positions because the work hasn't changed. And in fact, it's increased tenfold. So we have to get more people in. Well, one of our solutions and strategies was to create a more robust partnership with the MAL program and backfill a lot of positions through graduate assistants, that we can then create a pipeline because of the cost of living in Boise, Idaho, that we could create a pipeline and try to promote from within to backfill positions that potentially we lose. And it's been, really beneficial to us because a lot of our new hires started off as graduate assistants, and you get to see them work, you get to mentor them, you get to pour into them. They do the same, and they're bringing a lot of new ideas and things to the table that we're able to take and really create something epic that maybe others aren't doing. And I know these programs exist at other institutions, but I'm really proud of what the work that was done prior to me getting here, and how we've, in my opinion, which is very biased, how we've taken it to another level, because that group is so important to us as we continue to try to serve our staff, our student athletes, and our supporters on a completely different level.
Yeah, that pipeline is important because it can be helpful for both parties. Like you're talking about Chrissy Raywalk at Delaware. I had her on previously, and we talked about their undergraduate internship program where, I think it was like 20 positions that got to work with the athletic department. And it's hard to get that type of experience before you get to your first entry-level full-time job. But it can also help you all a lot as
Right.
hiring people is so difficult, and with the experience that we require. You kind of transitioned well into this topic about becoming an athletic director. So I remember I ended up deleting LinkedIn for some reason. I don't remember why, but you and I were connected on LinkedIn when you were still at Baylor. And we messaged back and forth a little bit. And I remember that you had a big hand in a lot of things that were going on at Baylor. And so when you got to Boise and everything going on now, nothing comes as a surprise that innovative wise that you've been doing. I've heard advice of people just saying, if you want to be an AD, just focus on the job you're doing. You kind of just mentioned it in my cabinet question, is meeting with the deans. That's stuff that you don't get as a deputy AD. But if for those that are senior level ADs and they want to be an athletic director, and we're seeing kind of that changing of the guard with Notre Dame, with Jack Swarbrick, and a couple articles being written every single time one of these, the older athletic directors leave the industry, and the industry changing so much. What is your message to people that are maybe that senior associate, that deputy level? How can they make it known they want to be an AD? But what kind of stuff did you learn to just do extra and learn from, whether it's Mack or someone else?
So I'll take the first question in regards to how to make it known, and relating it to my experiences. I was very fortunate. I'm not an outlier. I had a lot of people help me and pour into me along the way. I identified this path of wanting to be an athletic director very early on in my career. And part of that was reaching out and talking to people like Mack Rhoades or Hunter Yurachek and Lisa Campos, who's at UTSA. I've been fortunate to have a lot of ADs, or at that point, maybe they weren't, but a lot of people that wanted to be an AD that I was able to feed off of. And you don't get what you don't ask for, and so ultimately being able to share, here are the goals and what is the path. And if you make it to the senior level, at that point, you should have a pretty good idea of what your next step is. But I think those conversations with the athletic director or other mentors within the industry are important, because it helps you really refine and define maybe what those next steps are. I had very specific goals, and money was never a driver. It was the experience and how do I build a resume that could compete on a national level if an AD job were to be available. And there are no guarantees, right? I look at I think there's 131 FBS institutions, but that means there's 131 ADs. It's a very small circle. And, and I knew that early on, what was going to differentiate me from someone else. And that was something that I can, it's priceless. The experience that I had with a guy like Mack Rhoades and with someone like Hunter Yurachek at Arkansas, where I got to learn from who I feel are two of the best in the industry, and get to witness. And as I climbed, I was more connected to see their thought process and how they approached, issues and opportunities, and how they led, and how people were a priority, and this idea to serve. And it really benefited me, to learn. And quite honestly, I probably wasn't, I've always been one of the younger in my role, or whatever that position was. And in some cases, I probably wasn't prepared for it, but the best experience is doing, and to have them there as support, and to be able to go through that process, and I do believe everything happens for a reason. It made a difference, because then they knew exactly what I wanted and where I wanted to go. And that led to more, strategic and specific conversations of when opportunities did come available in a department, or there were additional duties that needed to be assigned. And that ties into the second question. I grew up in a time and age in our industry where we very much live by no one cares, work harder. And there wasn't anything that was below me that I wasn't willing to do. That's quite honestly how I created the relationship with Mack to the level it impacted him wanting to take me to certain schools. I was willing to do anything and everything that was asked of me, and willing to go out on the limb, knowing that it could break, that I saw opportunities, and to the willingness to take initiative and run the risk that maybe it wasn't what the department wanted or needed. But, part of that is I'm a competitor. And so when I look back on my time at UTEP and at Akron and at Houston, that very much defined me, that, if the AD was in the office, I was in the office, and I had, I was competitive. I wanted to beat him in, and I wanted to stay later than he did. And now, everything changes, and, but it is something that I go back to, that I am not the smartest. But the work ethic always, was something that I felt like I could compete with anyone with, on, and I learned a lot of that from Mack Rhoades specifically. And so, my advice to those that are climbing the ladder and want to take that next step, any experience that you can get. I mean, I can't tell you the things that hit my desk, that I'm so grateful for some of those experiences along the way that I picked up, because it at least gives me a foundation of thought in how I'm going to approach it. I may not always have the answer, but I have an experience in my past that I can look back to say, well, I remember when we did this and maybe it failed, or we had some success, and how do I adapt that to what we need here? And that defines me as a leader. My job is to define direction and empower our people, and really lead through those processes. And that was done, a lot of it by trial and error over the course of a career, and in many ways learning what not to do, that I feel like best positioned me coming in as a new AD to Boise State, that we're in COVID. all of a sudden conference realignment is happening, then name, image, and likeness is happening, then the transfer portal. I mean, it was like one thing after another within the first like 6 months on the job. But I look back and it's like this mentality of what's next. And it allowed me to really manage that process and hopefully put us in the best possible position coming out of some of the chaotic times that we were in.
Well, so that kind of reminds me, so one thing I took from the president's chief of staff, who I worked with every day at IU, was she said, instead of just thinking back on the last year, like, because everyone has to do like annual evaluations, she kind of took it as more of professional development. Like when you get through something big, either good or bad, we're all busy. Find 10 minutes and just keep a notebook, write it down, your thoughts, what you would do differently, what you thought you did good, what you didn't. And then you also can observe other people. And so I took that message from her. A big reason I even took that job, because why would I get out of athletic compliance and go work as a deputy executive assistant to the president? And it was really because I knew like access to experts. I mean, she's one of the best operators I've ever seen, the President Whitten. Huge sports fan too, but just working with the cabinet. And so what I learned is, even if I'm not in these certain positions, I can work as hard as I possibly can. But it's also, you get those little nuggets of information to ask a question from now and then about like what their thought process was, or just write down a note of a style, like not confidential information, but like how did that happen? And then how would that apply to athletics? So I'm kind of curious, did you ever, take notes or try and fit in those questions from time to time? Like obviously Mack, you were at 3 schools with him, so he knew you wanted to be an AD, but when you're all so busy, I mean, is it you just collecting the information, or did you find ways to like write down notes along the way for the future, or get in a little question here and there? What was kind of your style there?
One, I've been with him at 4 schools.
4.
And
Gosh.
yeah, UTEP, Akron, Houston, and Baylor. And I've been very fortunate. I have a, which sometimes bad, I guess, but I have an unbelievable memory. And so I'm always processing. And in these, and every experience was different. When I was at UTEP, I didn't have a lot of access to Mack. I mean, I was an intern, right? I was a paid intern. He was the number 2 in the department. And so you didn't really want to be in his office. That meant something happened, right? So, but the people that reported up through him, and it was a small team, that's how I got to know Lisa Campos or a Darren DiTilio or, a Todd Wired, who's at Northern Arizona. A lot of people that Dr. Kevin Hatcher, who was, I believe he got out, but was an athletic director. I was just very fortunate that I was always watching and I was always processing and making mental note of everything that everyone did. And I wasn't perfect at it, and I was young and just out of school. And so by no means did I wasn't as refined, or did I know exactly what I was doing at that time. But I learned a lot by watching. And, I remember certain scenarios and situations where, I know why decisions were made. And I remember making notes of if I would have made that same decision or not. And you kind of, for me at least, I was going through this process at every step of the way. What if I was AD? Would I make that same position, or would I go left instead of right? And whether it was right or wrong, it didn't matter, but it was always thinking like, what if, and when I'm in that role. A lot of that ties into the mental self-talk, and sometimes you gotta act it out before you become it. And I took that to every step of the process and every school that I was fortunate to be at. And at every level and every position, I got to learn a little bit different level of what the department was doing, and so seeing how, as an intern, the experience of the interns and graduate assistants, that stuck with me, and how I would treat, and not that they were treated incorrectly, but thinking like, wow, this is a powerful group, and these are the ones that are working really hard. How do we stay connected to them? And then going to that next level of defining expectations and leading a department, and watching how others led. And like I said, there was a lot of failure. Most of my success has become from failure. and learning what not to do, and really redefining, maybe a better path forward in that process. And so, I don't think there's any secret sauce to it, other than you got to curiously question, and you have to, if you want to be an AD, or you want to be a deputy AD, or whatever level you want to be at, you can start at a very early stage in your career in preparing for that role. And, you have to be intentional, you have to be strategic. And that was something that I took to heart based on some of those initial conversations with my immediate supervisors, and really being vocal about, I want to, I had very specific goals, 3 years, move up or on. And I knew I wanted to be an AD early on. So I knew I needed to get into fundraising. And so every decision tied into that, and every question I asked tied into what's next, and how do I best position myself in that. And so I'm not sure that answers your question,
Oh,
but
it does. I'm kind of, so, were you ever on those like professional development, cohorts that the industry has? Because I feel like, for one, there's not a lot of opportunities for those, and by the time you get to that, I feel like you are pretty advanced into your career, because I do think, like the way you just explained it, my learning style is to think similar to that, but like you can still create your own process to learn and prepare for these things. But I think some people think that you have to get into that academy cohort or something, or get invited to the Lead One Institute or something like that. Were you a part of that at all?
Lead One, I was fortunate to attend, and obviously there was NACDA and CALS when I was at the University of Houston. That was something that Ren Baker, good friend and amazing AD, he was someone that kind of took me under his wing and helped me get involved in CALS, and that's been very beneficial, and the people I've met through that. I see a lot of value in some of those professional organizations and conferences, and but so much can be learned from where you're at. And that was, and good or bad, I was at schools that we couldn't always afford to send people to NACDA, or to do some of those things. It was like a rotation, so you maybe go once every 3 years, but that doesn't mean you can't continue to learn. And and as I was going through that process, when I first started off, I was in marketing and promotions, and we actually had sales too, because this was pre-ISP, Learfield, etc. But I knew I wanted to be an AD, and I was told by Mack early on, at some point you need to get over into development. Well, when I was finished with my marketing and promotions responsibilities, so doing a soccer game or a volleyball match or whatever, and I'm so grateful that I got involved in that, because I mean, at that point, that was the external team. So I was creating stuff in Photoshop and all that stuff. And I'm not a creator, but I had to make a poster, but it was good because it gave me connection to the coaches, the connection to the student athletes, and the connection to all areas of external. Well, when I was done with my duties, I would go to the development director and say, how can I help you? Well, it may be 10 o'clock at night before a football game on that Friday night. And I would go out and put cones in spots and help, paint spots and identify tailgating areas and things that were other duties as assigned that I could have very easily have gone home. But through that, I was able to create some experience that when that job did open up, I was able to get it pretty easily, because I had created the relationships, and I hate using the word they helped me. They could very easily have sent me home, but we were a small staff and it was all hands on deck. And so, you're somewhat, limited by your willingness to do more than others, I was willing to do more at that point, because I had a very direct and defined path. And, at that point in time, and it very much helped me, because I was so fortunate to have people around me that took me under their wing and showed me, what to do or not to do. I think it's something that sometimes gets lost. You can learn a lot by reaching out. You can learn a lot by going to these conferences, but there's so much to learn where you're at. And, and it goes back to the curiously questioning, others' paths and why they chose theirs. I mean, you can find an AD that came from any area of a department, right? Compliance, ticket sales, academics, it doesn't matter. I can identify an AD that started in that space. But I think that was always really cool for me, because there really wasn't one way of doing it. And I had to identify something that fit my personality and who I was, because ultimately I had to be my authentic self in that. And I knew that was going to be important one day when I became an AD, that, I'm not going to be Mack Rhoades or Hunter Yurachek. My hope is I take the best of both and combine it with who I am, and hopefully do, the best I can at this job.
Yeah, I think so the initial reason I created Higher Ed Athletics in 2019 was because I was starting my doctorate program, but also, as I mentioned before, I made a commitment that I won't move my family out of Indiana, at least not yet. And so this is my way of learning from other people that are in these D1 AD chairs. And without it, I wouldn't have talked to that many. And a lot of it is the connections you keep after, and
Right.
having the conversations offline too. And that's not the same as doing the job, but the benefit is I also work in the industry, and I see what you mean by picking up your actual like interacting with coaches and compliance. When you're in compliance, you get to talk to coaches with bad news usually.
Yeah.
The funniest thing is when I was started at an athletic department, and people didn't realize that I was the host of Higher Ed Athletics, and because I never worked there before, and so that's always kind of a funny one. But it's one of those things where you can find opportunities to learn in your job and then outside of your job if you can't
Absolutely.
go to those.
Well, and think about, like, when I first moved over into the fundraising, side of the business, that was honestly how I created relationships with a lot of the donors, was asking them questions. You're a CEO of this company. Tell me how you did it, and what have you learned? And there's so much that you can take. I mean, there's, as the more I talk to these business owners and people who are supporters of ours, there's not much difference between my job and what I have to do on a daily basis versus what the CEO or CFO or, we're all similar. It may not be apples to apples, but you can learn a lot from the people around you. And that was something that, was important to me, because, I'm always trying to, I have high expectations. So I'm always trying to improve on how I do things.
Well, so I want to get to this what's next initiative. I like to ask tactical questions. So I was looking at your infrastructure plan, that Boise State's looking to create an athletics village with 12 priorities. I won't list all of them, but I had a few questions about this one. My first one was, did you share a similar vision in the interview process for the job, or was this something either already talked about or brought up to you to manage? Because I'm sure you had some type of vision going into that, but just kind of your how that came about.
So I did not define it through the process. My process was very non-traditional. It was all Zoom. It consisted of 2 interviews, and all offsite. So I had never stepped foot in Idaho, and had never been before. And so if you remember, when I got hired, I had to hire a football coach immediately. And so I went through this process in Illinois from my in-laws' office in a little town called Moments, with snow coming down outside, and sitting in front of a computer like this. And for my first interview ever as an athletic director, or for an athletic director, I should say. And so it was more getting to know and high level foundational things, but I hadn't seen the budget. I hadn't seen the school. I hadn't seen the facilities. So it was very difficult to define a direction, other than I knew there would be a plan. We would have the strategy. We would define the process, and we would, ultimately get there by the resources that I knew that we could bring in, and how we were able to monetize, or how I felt like we could monetize based on what I was able to get offline. So that really didn't start until mid-semester. When I first arrived, it was important for me to meet with everyone on staff, and very intentional one-on-one of very briefly introducing myself, but then wanting to hear from them. What did they see in the department? Where were their issues? Where were their opportunities? what did they envision for this place? And I took in a lot of information. And I hadn't defined anything for us yet because I felt it was important for me to fully understand, what I was walking into and what the expectations were, not only of our staff, but I also met with a lot of our donors, sponsors, and people outside within the community to fully understand what we represented here and what their expectations were. And, I had my own internal thoughts based on just asking questions and walking around, but I was not interested in trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. I needed to make sure that what I define as a leader of a brand and a leader of Bronco Nation and overall, I had to define a direction that I made sure fit what my team and Bronco Nation wanted to accomplish. It didn't help me if I defined it and they weren't on board with it, because that created uncomfortableness and challenges. Now that didn't mean that everyone needed to be on board with it, but you talk to enough people and I understood very early on, we want a vision, we want to define direction. And that's across the board in our fundraising initiative, in our ticket sales, in our internal operations in sports medicine and mental health, and some of the areas that I saw or maybe didn't see that I had experienced at other institutions. And so over the course of that first semester, mind you, I had hired 3 coaches that first semester. I was really trying to define what was next for us. And what's next that's something I've learned over time, and actually took from Coach Rule at Nebraska. And that was something that he had brought to Baylor, because we had to have that type of mentality. And that was something I learned so much from Coach Rule. I should have mentioned him earlier as a mentor, and just how he came into an uncomfortable situation and really defined the expectations, and that what's next mentality fit me. And it was something that I saw us live out. And that really was the first step. We are going to be relentless, and what's next is going to be the mentality. We cannot rest on our past successes. We cannot rest on yesterday's successes, or even failures. We cannot wallow and worry about the spilt milk. We got to continue to move, and we got to continue to show progress. And that's where what's next came from. And then as I added staff and started to identify areas, knowing that, okay, when I look at external relations and coming from the external relations side, we didn't have a ticket sales team. We didn't really have an annual fund team, and we really didn't have a major gift team. And I knew resources were going to be a priority. And I knew telling our story around what we were doing and why we were doing it and where we were going was going to be a priority. So we invested heavily into creative, into communications, into our BA annual fund team. We split out ticket operations, added a ticket sales team, partnered with advancement to add a major gift team. All that team does is 24/7 fundraise, and really try to get strategic, and then went to the internal side and did the same thing. We needed a mental health program. We needed a more robust mental health program. We had one person at that point, and we needed a nutrition dietitian program because of what was going to be expected with transfer portal and some of these other things that were ahead of us. And really started to utilize the investment in external to monetize our operations, to create the resources to then reinvest back into the staff and student athlete experience and the team behind the team that serves all these areas. And so late in that first spring, and into that summer, we started the conversations around, okay, who are we and who do we want to be? And that really tied into the pillars, around the What's Next initiative. And I have to give credit to Cody Gogler, who's our senior associate for external, and people like Mike Walsh. I have an unbelievable team, and we started whiteboarding, and ultimately we came up with the 4 pillars. And every decision we make as a department ties into one of those 4 pillars. And if we're doing it right, it usually ties into more than one. And it was important for us because it kept us focused on what we were doing and why we were doing it. And so every decision that I've made, whether it's been a good or bad decision, has been tied into the strategy around those 4 pillars. And that really created the foundation for knowing we needed to do a capital campaign, knowing we needed to do the playbook for success, which tied into our facilities and really started to define that vision and really led to a lot of the early success in terms of fundraising. Because then when I got in front of a donor, I said, I heard you, this is the direction. What's next is your support, and really went through that process. And that's when our Lyle Smith took off. And, and that was something that was created right before I got here. And within that first year, we were able to go from 30 Lyle Smiths to over 100, and now we're over 220, I think. And those are all major gifts. And that was massive for us, because that was backfilling the things that we needed internally so we could invest into our operations. So that's a lot, but
no, it's great. I believe you guys have a special domain for that too, right? That I like how front facing a lot of these projects are for that Boise's doing, and other places that, I mean, it's really in your face without being crowded inside of, the standard athletic department website.
correct. That ties into the investment in our creative and comms team, and that's something that, when I look at the industry, we're telling your story is so important and valuable. And, whether it impacts recruiting, whether it impacts fundraising, whether it impacts season tickets, whether it impacts staff and as you recruit staff, we wanted to tell our story differently than others. You don't want to go out publicly with a statement of, we don't have enough money and we need your support. We repackaged everything and tied it into specific projects that we knew were going to pay dividends, whether we could monetize it or it was going to create a better experience, in turn driving better recruiting, in turn driving higher level competition. And so when we look at that playbook for success and all the projects that we identified, and why I wanted to bring people closer to the heart of the operation, our administration building, it was very intentional to really define what the next 5 to 10 years would look like. And so far, I believe it was over $300 million at the time. Inflation, it's most likely gone up, but some of it, knowing that we're probably not going to start some of these projects for 10 plus years, but at minimum, giving our staff, our student athletes, our coaches, and Bronco Nation a level of hope that I knew would be powerful. And as you know, hope is powerful. And so when you look at getting shovel to ground, which we're well ahead of the process in terms of the North End Zone facility and how that's going to impact all 350 plus student athletes, and something we can monetize. And you look at the Ox Gym for basketball, and you look at some of the smaller projects like lights at Boaz and for soccer, and things that I saw as low-hanging fruit to create the best possible experience, which also helped with Title IX assessment and some of the other things that we have to think about as an AD. We have moved very quickly, and probably, some would say we need to slow down, but that's not my mentality, and I would be doing us a disservice, because that's not who I am. And I see, the potential, and I'm fortunate that I have the team that's bought into this vision.
Well, so the reason I asked about the domains is, so you mentioned Ren Baker. So Ren was on the podcast with me when he was still in North Texas, and he seems to be doing a great job at West Virginia. I mean, he looks like he's lost a bunch of weight too, so he's looking healthy on Twitter. But he's been there if I needed to ask a question or something. But I tried to get it out of like, how many domains do you have, to him, because he explained, for those that want to learn more about how they rolled out their vision, go check out the episode. But I mean, he had a bunch of different domains, and they have very interactive websites, and it really reminded me a lot when I saw the What's Next initiative about what they're doing. And it's gonna have to become standard, because it's just good storytelling, like you said. But it's also fun because you get to just go get random things, because he did not want to clutter the athletic department website too. And so it's just a good way to send to people. I thought it's a great idea.
And I think, when you look at who our constituents are, everyone takes in information differently. And, the website serves its purpose, but things do get lost. And so how do we create more opportunities for us, to tell that story, and then utilize the social media platforms, and make sure we're strategic with the messaging, the same messaging that's used on Twitter isn't necessarily the same that's used on LinkedIn, that isn't the same that's used on Facebook or Instagram, and having a team that really, adapts to that. And some platforms are more used from a recruitment standpoint. Others are more used to help us fundraise and really drive, some of that.
Well, as a start to wrap up, I kind of want to end about the What's Next initiative. I like to get tactical, like I said, about people that might be in this situation. And I got some insight into this with my previous job. There's a facility that just got approved for a 5,000 seat arena inside the city of Indianapolis for what's going to be IU Indianapolis Jaguars basketball. But for those unfamiliar with state government funding and approval, can you walk me through how the proposal was actually put together after working with, I think you all use a consulting firm, because I'm assuming lots of conversations with the president and whoever's running capital projects at the university. But I don't think a lot of people realize about having to get some of this stuff approved as well.
Yeah, I mean, initially, there was this East Side Stadium project when I first got here, and there really wasn't much else. It was pretty much a clean slate, and which was great. And but I didn't want to start something without taking a holistic view of 18 sport programs, 350 plus student athletes, and what we needed overall as a department. And so I slowed down a piece of this to bring on AECOM, who was essentially our, international architecture firm and specific to sports. And I brought them on and had previous relationships with them and knew we needed to move quickly. And obviously we were in the middle of conference realignment discussions and other things, and really trying to turn the ship much quicker than maybe's been done. And, and went to them and said, look, here's what we're looking for. And here are our facilities currently, and help us dream. And what could this place be? And, and they very much played a part. And, it was probably a 9-month process. And we really dug into 18 sports and what was going to be best for us. And that really defined some of these projects. And knowing that we were going to launch a capital campaign, trying to identify some low-hanging fruit that I knew we would be successful, because as soon as people see shovel and ground and see the crane and see dirt moving, it excites, the masses. And, and we really hadn't built anything here in quite a while. And so that really drove that process. And through that, we identified this North End Zone piece that would give us this 360 view or concourse in our stadium, and really allow us to appropriately serve, but then also create more premium space, because we had a waiting list in Stickle Sky Center where our suites, loge boxes, club seats are. And so I knew, 1, we could fundraise for it, 2, we could sell it, and 3, it would pay for itself. And that checked a lot of boxes for us here as we're trying to stretch dollars. And it also impacted all 18 sport programs, because it's going to become the nutrition center for, all of our student athletes. And that was the first big project that we went to the state on. And the difficult part is, it's the chicken or the egg. We have the assessment, we have a good understanding of what it could cost at that point in time, and had to get it through various committees. And through that process, I couldn't take anything forward without the support of the institution. And so the president and I, along with some others on campus, they had to be bought into what we were presenting. And we individualized the projects, and we started to take them forward. And so that North End Zone facility project, we took to one of the committees in August of last year to then get it on the board agenda, the state board, who has to approve us moving forward with the design build in October. And then from October to the RFQ going out this month, is just the behind the scenes and the process of getting it on the list and running out all the ground balls in terms of how you're going to pay for it. Do you have the money in hand to be able to, to fund the design build, et cetera? And there's a lot of moving pieces to that. And we were able to get that done. Well, in the meantime, while we were going through that process, we took the Ox Gym forward and got approval on that in February. And so you're constantly moving, and you don't want to stop. And so, a lot of that ties into the telling of our story, the why behind what we want to do, and ultimately the driver behind what we're fundraising, and ultimately the launch of a capital campaign, and so our state is very different from states that I've worked at or worked in, where we don't have a individual board for our institution. We have a state board that oversees K through college. And that creates some different opportunities, because I had never gone through that. So I very much leaned on some of my campus teammates of how do we do this, and help me find success through this, and get everything I need to be able to present appropriately. And they were able to do that. And, and so now we have 2 projects in the design build phase, and there's more coming. And so I've learned a lot through it. It's not easy. You're dealing with, there's reasons these committees and these processes exist. And we obviously want to be fiscally responsible. And so it's really forcing us to be specific and to get in the weeds on why we're doing it and how we're going to pay for it. And, and that's led to some really cool conversations that has led to some success from a fundraising standpoint.
Yeah, the closing of the end zones, so when I was in high school, I think IU was working on their south end zone, IU football, and they finished that. I had a family friend playing that time, so I got to go to some IU games. And then it's like, okay, well, when are they going to do the north side? Because it was just grass and old school bleachers, and you don't realize they did it several years later. And when I spent my 3 years in athletics there, you realize how much you can utilize those spaces. And so that's what's, like you just said, I mean, it's at IU, it's now the nutrition and medical on the bottom floor. And on the top floor, you've got the cafeteria for all of the student athletes, and you got the life skills area too. So you can just do so much while also getting better premier seating. And so it kind of almost pays for itself over time, and everybody gets to benefit.
Well, and that was the value of bringing in, someone like AECOM. And there's a number of architects out there that I think very highly of. But it's what you need now, but it's also planning for what the future brings. And, at any given point, we may expand our stadium or work towards expanding our stadium. We're always adding staff. And the way this industry is going, just to give yourself the best chance of success in the future, while making sure you're committed to the present, can be a challenge. And so bringing in someone like AECOM to help us think through that of, this is what it could be. And then this is phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and how this stadium will ultimately look maybe 10, 20 years from now, I think was important. I didn't want to band-aid anything. I didn't want to just get shovel and ground just because this wasn't a resume builder. This was what we felt was best for our institution and our department. And it impacted a lot of people. And as we try to monetize our facilities and, bring in more concerts, and like we just had Luke Combs, anytime you can bring in more premium space, and the fact that we were on a waiting list, we know that my goal is to be a sustainable department. Like, we know that we need to create more opportunities and better fan engagement and experience, because we're competing with an unbelievable state and the things to do within this state. We're also competing with television, and we need to drive as many people here as possible. Well, the way you do that is really pour into, in my opinion, new video boards and new lights and new upgrades, that really push people to attend.
Well, I had 2 more questions, but I just want to get to one because I've kept you too long, but it's kind of about history lessons. So I read in an interview that you did recently, maybe it wasn't recently, but I saw it recently, where you basically said you like to acknowledge history, but not continue to live in it. And I think this could hold some athletic departments back as college athletics continues to evolve. I mean, I work at Indiana State, and first thing people think of is Larry Bird. And it's great history, but you have to be able to move on. And so athletic director Sherrod Klingsales has done a good job over the 7 years of doing that. But there's so much going on, including conference realignment or rebranding. That stuff, that tradition can almost keep you back, that history. So what would your advice be to current or future athletic directors that may deal with some friction when talking to alums or donors during such huge change? I mean, obviously you would not take the blue turf away, as we talked about before, but I mean, how do they kind of balance that history but not living in it?
I think it goes back to the storytelling, and it's a fine line. I'm very proud of our history. I'm grateful to be at a place that went to 3 Fiesta Bowls and has had 27 years of bowl eligibility and the success of a lot of our other sport programs. You don't want to downplay that. At the same time, if you live in the past, you're not moving forward, and this industry is changing by the day. And so, I want to consistently remember it and recognize it, because it is part of who we are and part of our brand and why I'm here today. At the same time, there's so much ahead of us in regards to whether it's getting back to those moments or taking advantage of them once you do, that I think will really define who we are, 5-10 years from now. And it tied in for me, like the storytelling, and really recognizing and acknowledging that there were a lot of great things that were done at this place prior to me arriving. And, my job is to enhance, like everyone else has, to take what you're given and to make it better. And, and I think that tied into the vision and the direction for donors and our staff and our state in general. Like I said earlier, hope is a powerful thing. We've been to the top a handful of times, and quite honestly, more than any other group of 5, or non-autonomous 5, institution. And we're proud of that. At the same time, to continue that, we cannot settle. And, and settling is ultimately, that's something I try to avoid, and it doesn't mean don't change, just change for the sake of changing. We are really defining what's next for this institution, and we are trying to define our own expectations, because if you don't, they'll be defined for you. And I'm really proud of how our team has embraced that, and the community has embraced that. And quite honestly, our donors have embraced it, to get back to those moments and to truly take advantage of them. We need to do the things that we've set out to do, and people have really bought into that. And I think, and I truly believe, the future is very bright for us.
I once we get to the end of the interview, I was wondering if you ever have taken the Russell Wilson approach and say, Bronco Nation, let's ride at the end of all your interviews. That's what you should do at your media availability, right?
I have not, I'm not sure that's,
You might have trademarked it. You might not be able to say it.
Yeah. No, usually there's a go Broncos and what's next. So.
Oh, see, there you go. You basically got a Seahawks version. So Jeramiah Dickey, Boise State Athletic Director. Thanks so much for being on the Higher Ed Athletics podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it.